Taming the High Cost of College, Ep028.
You have kids, they grow up, and before you know it, it's time to plan for college.
Where do you start?
How much is it going to cost?
Will you qualify for financial aid?
Should you be looking into scholarships?
When will you be able to retire?
What about student loans?
The list of questions is never ending. The good news is, all the answers are right here. Welcome to the Taming the High Cost of College podcast. Here is your host, certified financial planner, Brad Baldridge.
Hello, and welcome to Taming the High Cost of College. I'm your host, Brad Baldridge, and in today's episode, we have an interview with Holly Bull. And she's the president of the Center for Interim Programs. And what Holly does is help college students figure out if they should take a gap year, and if they do take a gap year, what they should do during that gap year. So she's a consultant and expert on taking time off from school to do other things like work and travel and intern and volunteer and all kinds of great things like that. So this is applicable for a student that wants to take an entire year off, but also if your student may want to look for something to do for a particular summer or a semester, or even something as short as a Christmas break. Holly gave us a lot of great ideas and lots to think about when it comes to why you may want to consider taking a little time off from your college career in order to explore other things. And it certainly opened my eyes. I learned a ton. Even if you think your student is going direct to college, I think you'll learn a lot about the idea that students need to grow up as part of the college process and how that can help them get admitted to where they want to go and help them get into colleges they're more interested in. So again, without further delay, let's move on and jump into the interview with Holly Bull. And again, show notes are available at tamingthehighcostofcollege/28. So all the information and links and resources are available at our website. So you don't need to write them down as you're listening. You can just go to the website and get all the details. Let's move into the interview with Holly. Hello, today I'm sitting down with Holly Bull. She's the president of the Center for Interim Programs, which is a consulting agency that helps people figure out the gap year and help them through the gap year process. Welcome, Holly.
Thank you, Brad. Thank you for having me.
So before we jump into the details of the gap year, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, how you came to be involved in the gap year and your company?
Yes, my father actually started this company in 1980 after being a teacher and a headmaster for many years, both in the U.S. and abroad. And he always saw a need for something like this and had actually begun collecting program ideas in the 60s and just for 20 years tossed them into a shoebox. And then he started this company here in New Jersey at a time when really nobody was talking about gap year in the United States. It was definitely underway in the United Kingdom and in England, but very new in the States. And it really just took off from there. So I was graduating from high school myself at the time and took a gap year before college. And then I took another gap year after my sophomore year in college. And those are often the typical times when people take gap time. Most students are taking the break between high school and college. And then there are these step-aways, as I call them, the students who are just have gotten to college and they're stepping away and exploring. They're not sure what they want to do or they just need a break. So I'm very biased on a personal level for my own 2 gap years, and also I've been counseling students now for about 24 years, and all I do is gap year counseling. So I've worked with over 1,000 students, midwifing them through this process.
Wow, okay. So I guess that leads us to the first obvious question is, what is a gap year?
Well, a gap year, it shouldn't necessarily be called a year because it's really gap time. It can be any period of time. It doesn't have to be a year. Typically, it is a year between high school and college where students explore different areas of interest hands-on. It is not a year off. It is very much a year on. And it is a wonderful period of time to be able to learn in a different way, get more clarity about what you might want to focus on in college or not, and also prepare for the work world beyond.
Okay, so what are students typically doing then? Are they traveling, working, all the above?
It really runs the gamut. When I sit down with a student and just look at their basic areas of interest, locations in the world they might be drawn to or general areas of interest, I just start to match them with program options, and the programs can vary widely. I mean, it can be a group program specifically set up for gap year students. These are more the facilitated programs where you're with leaders and peers, and say for 3 months you're doing service work and homestays and language and cultural immersion in Latin America or Asia or Africa or the United States or Fiji, New Zealand, Australia. And those typically have fees, tuitions attached to them, but often have scholarships. Then there are short intensives, like skill-based intensives. So students can go and learn how to run a recording studio or get their WEMT certification, Wilderness Emergency Medical Technician, or they could get more experience doing filmmaking. So these can be tucked into a gap year or pulled into even summers down the line. And then there's a whole range of volunteer options, internship placements, that students can engage in, often more low-cost placements, service-oriented, hands-on work, working on farms, ranches, tall ships, working with animals. Some students will take gap time just to work at home. You don't have to necessarily go racing off far afield. I think the year definitely needs, or the time you're taking, it helps to have structure. So it should be planned. And I think for parents, that's important to know that it really helps to sit down with a student and kind of map out a scenario. Now, many students with whom I work do combinations of things. So they might start out with more of a structured group program in the fall, and then take a break and then head into more independent service-oriented options or volunteer placements or internships in the winter to spring, because they can take on more independence at that point.
Okay. So if I'm a parent of a student, and I'm guessing for a lot of parents, this is kind of the first time they've ever really thought about it, is hearing us talk about it. So how do you know if you're a good candidate or something you should be exploring?
Mm-hmm. I mean, I would say, and again, I'm biased here, but I think the gap year and the gap time is really perfect for anybody who's interested, just as a general statement. It gets so much harder to take this kind of time to do this kind of creative exploring later in one's life. Teens and 20s, you're really not tied to much. This is the time to explore widely and really get a good sense of what lights you up or not, because there's so many people heading off to college and graduating with a major, and they still don't have a clue as to what they want to do. Then they have to get a job, and they're not very well prepared for that process. If they can take some time and get more experience hands-on, get a half step out into the world in a sense, it's going to make the transition into college easier, but also transitioning from college into the work world is a whole lot easier. Mm-hmm. And on a practical level, they're building a resume through that gap time. So, I mean, for parents, when they look at a student, if a student seems really just tired of the academic process or isn't sure about heading to college or isn't sure what they want to study in college, those can be signs. Or if they're saying, they're not really indicating clarity. I don't think a gap year should be forced on anyone. Sometimes parents want their child to take a break if they haven't been doing particularly well. They don't feel like paying for college if the student's not going to apply themselves, him or herself. So, but typically it's ideal for the student to be on board, because to my mind as a gap year counselor, this is sort of the core, the philosophical core of this for me. It's all about choosing. What you're doing is you're offering a young person, often the first time in their lives, and a good chunk of time where they're picking and choosing what they want to do. And as I said, they're working within parameters that parents lay out, obviously. So there needs to be safety issues and looking at those and budget and so forth. But really, as much as possible, the student is choosing something and going toward it and owning it. And that's a real shift, because they don't choose school. When you have somebody who's really excited about a period of time that they get to pick what they want to do, they step into it like nobody's business. And then they become much more proactive in general about their lives, and they take that energy into college, and they're much better students in college.
Right. So as I'm listening to you, I realize that I actually took a gap semester. I just didn't think of it that way, because when I was in college, I don't know, about the end of my junior year, I started thinking about studying abroad. And my first semester senior year, I just pulled the trigger, went to London and studied there. Mm-hmm. None of the courses applied to my major or helped me graduate.
Right.
But it was an opportunity that, like you said, you're young, you have the opportunity. I don't have any ties. I was going to be 4.5 years, so I stretched it to 5, and it was the best thing I ever did.
Right.
So,
And that's what you often hear is it was the best thing I ever did, or it's still really vivid. These experiences stay with you all your life. And they're really unique. I mean, you in London taking classes, the classroom familiarity, but then there's that whole process of stepping into a different culture and
right.
knowing you can handle yourself very well, navigating a city more on your own.
Exactly. Going to the corner pub and
Yep.
just hanging out, because it's a lot different than a vacation to London where you're there 2 weeks and you go and see everything you can see.
Yeah.
When you're there for 4 months, it's like, all right, well, tonight we're just going to watch British TV. And
Right.
look how different it is than what we do.
Right.
And
And it's
we're going to go out to the pub or go out to the theater and just do what the local kids do for fun. And it was vastly different. So I guess that would be one example of travel. What else might people do? Work? Does Peace Corps fall into this bucket? What are the students doing? Are they earning money or spending money, or how does that usually work?
Well, they typically it's harder often to make money if you're abroad. So usually what I'm recommending to students is that they work in the summers to help pay for their gap time. And even if they don't have to, I usually recommend that students work and chip in because it's their year. And that's part of what they're learning is the financial responsibility and financial awareness. That's actually a really interesting skill in the gap year process is students are much more inclined to focus on budget because they have these carrots out there in front of them that they want to get at. And if parents sit down and say, okay, look, here's what we can comfortably or are willing to put toward your gap time. You need to work within this budget. That student's going to learn how to budget because there's much more incentive to do so. So they can work in the summers, and it can really follow a school calendar. So after they graduate from high school, work in that summer, and then when their friends are heading off to college or whatever they're doing, ideally a student's heading out on some kind of an experience. And that could be, as I said, more of a cultural immersion group experience. It could be an urban internship. I mean, I have students heading off to Dublin, Ireland or Wellington, New Zealand, and they're living in shared apartments with fellow interns and learning how to cook for themselves and clean up after themselves and head out the door every day to a job like placement. And that could be working with a startup company. It could be in journalism. It could be teaching. So they're checking out a particular field of interest.
Okay, so they're doing a 9 to 5, but they're doing it in a foreign country and they're not being paid, which
Right. They're
would
not
be
being
work visas and problems with that. I would understand.
right, right. And they may have to pay for that placement, but it's well worth it for the skills that they're gaining and for the resume they're building. But most importantly, it's, hey, do I like this kind of work? Or I'm good at this, or I'm not so good at that, or I don't like this aspect of it. I mean, those are skills they're going to take with them no matter what.
And then in the meantime, they have their nights and their weekends to
orchestrate themselves.
Yeah, learn new cultures and grow up a little.
Yep.
So,
And some of these places that students are landing, the drinking age is 18, so they're really treated as adults at 18. American students, I think, are fairly infantilized. I don't think we give them enough responsibility or really trust them enough to take things on more. And so with the gap year students, what I see is they really step into being more responsible for themselves. They may go a little overboard and drink too much, or they're doing that in college as well. But they're in a culture often where it's not such a big deal to do that, and it pretty much tapers off. And then they hit freshman year in college with a lot more balance, and they're less likely to be swept along by some of the crazy things that happen in college.
okay, so let's transition a little bit. Let's talk about timeline a little bit. If I'm thinking, oh, that's a great idea, but I've got a senior and we're right in the middle of applying to colleges, and so what's a typical timeline? When do you start deciding if and when you're going to do it, and how do you apply, or where do you apply, or what's the process like if you decide to do it?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think for parents and students, actually, I think it's really helpful to offer students this option so that as they're thinking about college, there is also this option of the gap year, and they can look at both. So they could start looking at this in their sophomore, junior year. However, they don't have to really address what they're going to do until even the second half of the senior year. So what I often tell students is, look, just focus on your college apps because there's a lot of energy going into that in the fall of their senior year. Get that done. And then once that's done, you can start to work on your gap year plans.
Okay,
It's
let me interrupt you there because I think I don't want to gloss over this. So what you're saying is, even though you're going to take a gap year, you're going to go ahead and apply to colleges anyway?
Usually what we recommend is that students go through that process with the support of their high school counselors, and then just ask for a deferral.
Right.
So they'll get in ideally where they want to go. Then they ask for a deferred year so they can come the year after their gap year, and then they don't have to think about it. It's done.
Right.
Some students really don't want to do that. They would rather wait and apply halfway through their gap year, and some are reapplying. So if they don't get in where they want to go the first time round, they might reapply halfway through the gap year. It's not a guarantee in terms of getting in, obviously, but it definitely can help, because for the colleges, it puts students in a different bracket. You know, you have a different voice coming through. I was just on a panel with Mark Hatch at Colorado College, and he said, he's in admissions at Colorado College. He said, we'd love to see 20% of our incoming freshmen have taken a gap year. He said they are much better students. They're leaders on campus. They add to this campus. And that's what we're hearing now from the colleges. So it's not going to be held against you if you take a gap year, as long as you do something productive with it, and you're not just a couch potato.
Right. Okay. So you do the normal process for college as a senior, and then sometime, if you're thinking about it as a senior, I would assume you can gather information on options and choices.
Yeah.
As soon as you'd like, but then when's a typical deadline of, if you're going to sign up for a particular program, when do they expect to see applications or
Again,
whatever?
It's really flexible because it depends on the program. So again, it's not like applying to college. We have students who start working with us in August to start in September. Now that's not ideal, but it's doable. So some you can get into very last minute, language programs and so forth. Some of the group programs, skill-based intensives don't need a lot of lead time as long as they have space. And usually you don't need to have a lot of background experience to be able to attend.
Right. But what I tell people about scholarships is very similar. You can apply anytime, but a lot of scholarships happen in mid-fall and a lot of scholarships happen in February, March. So
Right. And actually that's good to bring up. If you have scholarship for college, they don't always defer the scholarship you're given. They may defer your admission, but you may have to reapply for scholarship. For gap year programs, again, it's a little bit different. The sooner you apply to some of the group programs, say, that offer scholarship, the more likely you might be to get a good scholarship. That's true. So if you're on a budget and you want to consider those, the sooner you start looking into the process, the better. It just gives you more options.
So what would be early and what would be
early
late?
would be the beginning of your senior year.
Beginning of your senior year. Okay, so it's very similar. Year. Yeah, very similar to a college application process.
Yeah, I mean that would probably make it easier on you.
Right.
And then others they really won't matter. And there's so many programs that provide people with housing and food in exchange for labor. I think there's a perception out there that you have to have a lot of money to do a gap year, and it's just not true. Yes, there are a lot of programs that cost a chunk of change, but you don't have to do those. I have a student right now who is covering most of the cost of her gap year. She's worked this past summer. She's going to go do volunteer work at a wolf sanctuary in the States this fall, and she just has to bring her tent and her food, and will help out. And then in the spring, she's looking at working with kids in the outdoors as a counselor, and they're going to give her room and board and a stipend. Another fellow, Brand, has worked this past summer. He's on board a tall ship right now, getting housing and food in exchange for labor. This is off the East Coast. And then he's going to head to New Zealand. So he's got an airfare, say $2,000 round trip airfare, which he's covering. But once he's there, he's going to be working at a youth hostel for housing and food and a bit of money. And then he's probably going to start working on some farms that will also give him housing and food. If your housing and food costs are covered, you're just looking at travel and miscellaneous expenses. And so it's pretty reasonable for anyone, if they're willing to work, to help pay for it.
Okay, so how do you find these? I'm willing to work and I want to go to New Zealand. I wouldn't even know where to start.
Right. I mean, there are a number of resources out there now, which I think really help students and parents. They're counselors. People work with us. These two students worked with me. I actually gave them both scholarships for our fee. That's the other thing, is make sure you ask counselors if you have scholarships, if you need some help, and the programs. And then if you don't want to work with a counselor, you have the USA Gap Year Fairs out there. These are nationwide fairs taking place around the States, and they run between January and February. There is a new organization called the American Gap Association, and they are vetting programs and listing programs. They're new, so there aren't obviously not all the programs are up there, but that helps people get underway. There are 2 online organizations, Go Overseas and Teen Life Media, that just list programs. Now, just the buyers have to beware on these because these aren't vetted program options. So you definitely want to do your due diligence and grill the programs, ask for alumni, talk to people who've attended. One of the best questions I tell students and parents to ask is, if you're talking to somebody who's been on a program, you want to say, what was the worst aspect of this experience? Don't say, how was it? And then there are books out there, Gap Year American Style, just do internet searches. The advent of the internet has made so many of these programs instantly available. That wasn't the case in the 80s or even the early 90s. So that's been a real shift in the gap year world.
Okay, yeah, so all the resources you just mentioned, we will put up in our show notes so those of you that are out there driving or whatever, you can just come back to Taming the High Cost of College, episode 28, and we'll have that, so it'll be /28, and we'll have all that detail. Thanks for that, by the way.
You're welcome.
All right, so let's talk a little bit more about financing then.
I had written down a couple of things here, just, looking at Taming the High Cost of College, that first of all, debunking this myth that you have to spend a lot to have an interesting gap year. You don't. You can have a very low cost gap year and have a wonderful year and learn a whole range of things through the process. And also, I think what people and parents especially sometimes don't realize is that college is going to cost quite a bit, and usually students take more than 4 years to finish college. So you're often looking at 5 or 6 years of college tuition on average. When a student is more focused and they're clear about a major, or they're better students, the gap year students are more efficient students. They're much less likely to take that much time to finish college. They've already done that exploring through the gap year. And again, they don't have to do it in an expensive way. So people can save money over time by taking the gap year with less time in college, floundering around.
Right, I would agree with that, especially for that undecided student that is going to change their major 3 times and be there 7 years.
Right.
If they spend a gap year and they can cancel out just one of those major changes,
you've saved a huge amount.
It's probably paid for itself and then some.
Right. And, students often will place out of a language requirement. I had several young men who were doing Mandarin intensives in China, a wonderful program. After 3 months, coming away with a huge amount of fluency. One of them had no Mandarin before he went, and he placed out of second-year Chinese at Penn. And another fellow just placed even higher at another university. So that can be a help. Some programs provide college credit. And again, often the scholarships. And then there's a real benefit post-college. Many students, when they finish up college, still don't know what they want to do. Sometimes they're back home with parents. And what you'll find with the gap year students is they're already launched. When you have this half step out into the world and you can handle yourself, and you've got those work skills, and you have your resume that's forming, you're much more likely to move right into work. How you show up in an interview is different. When you can track gap year students' GPAs in college, they're higher. They've done the research now. What you can't track as easily is the quality of that person's sense of self and self-confidence. But you can feel it when you're in the presence of someone who's taken this kind of time. Years ago, I worked with a young man, and he worked on board tall ships, and he traveled. He took 2 gap years, and then he finished college in 3 years, and he came back into my office. His name was Wes. And at one point, he looked at me and said, "Holly, I can pretty much talk my way into any job." And I thought, wow, even if those jobs were basic, what was really impressive was he wasn't boasting. It was just his confidence. And the second thought was, heck, I'd hire him. It was so appealing. And there was no strain. He was really comfortable. He knew that when you meet people and you work well, people hire you. And that's what he projected. So it didn't matter that he'd been working on a ship or working in basic other jobs. If he sits in an interview in front of anyone, it's going to be there. He has that. It's personal power.
Right, absolutely. So then let's transition now to what are some of the other benefits as far as, we talked about the money and obviously the skills, but how do colleges look at it as far as?
Well, I think the colleges now are becoming more aware. And as I said, in the 1980s, this was still such a relatively new field, and it's not mainstream now, but it's certainly much more well-known. And you see the change in colleges that are actually creating gap year programs in a sense. So Princeton University has the Bridge Year, which is in essence a gap year that they're helping to fund. Tufts University just created their own. UNC Chapel Hill has money that they give to gap year students. So when the colleges are endorsing it, or Colorado College, as I said, that's a huge endorsement. That starts to really set a ripple out into the states and to all the colleges that there's something to pay attention to with these gap year students. So that's going to help. Just having that support on the college level. I think I mentioned this before, but when students go through K through 12 years of schooling, on a certain level, I think they know the drill so well, they're just not that fired up. And having a chance, or many of them have been working really hard, having a chance to just rest and rejuvenate is a really helpful, powerful part of a gap year. So they hit college with a lot more vigor.
Right.
I certainly felt it. I did the aquaculture research in Hawaii for the first half of my gap year. Okay, realized I don't want to be a marine biologist, and then went off to Greece and did a course of study where everything I was studying was integrated as a curriculum, and then it was right under my nose in this culture around me. So I hit college so hungry to learn in a way that I wasn't before. And that makes a big difference, I think, in terms of just taking advantage of what college has to offer right away.
Right.
But, beyond that, it's just this level of maturity and independence that students have. And that's really what parents want. You want, ideally, your child to be fired up, excited about something, and then able to handle themselves off and away in a responsible way.
Right. Now, what if you have the student that the gap year, I don't know how I can explain this. Do you have a student that's struggling a little bit in high school, and they kind of want to go to college, but that student that says, well, maybe I'll take a year off and just work because I can't quite get enough gumption to start college. I think a lot of parents, when they hear that, are thinking, well, if they don't go to college immediately, then they're not going to go at all.
Right.
And then they're going to flounder from low-paying job to low-paying job for 5 years. Then they'll figure it out, and then they'll go to college.
Right.
So if you're that parent, is there a way that you can structure that gap year or kind of make it work a little smoother?
Yeah, and I think that's really the importance of having a structure to the year. I mean, the gap year does take work. College is, in a sense, an easy process. You apply, you go, you're right in that structure, and it's a familiar, fairly familiar experience. The gap year is much more dynamic because students change as they go through it. They may have different experiences they're stepping into, has more moving parts. So you really do have to be committed to taking on that process. When I'm working with gap year students, they're obviously doing a fair number of things. So not as many of them are just working for the whole of that gap year. Because they have these structured options, they're stepping into interests. Typically, that process is leading to college. Right. Very few of the students with whom I work are not going to college. In fact, there are a number of students' parents have said to me, my child would have been dropping out of college if he or she hadn't taken this gap year. Thank you. And so that's more of what I see. Right. If a student steps out and says, you know what, I'm going to work for a year, mom and dad, and then my plan is to head to college. If it seems like they have that structure and focus, and it works, great. You may want some backup options. So I would say still research program options because you might tie that in. It could be a month or 2 months that's woven into that year of working as well.
Right. I mean, I guess what I see is when I'm learning from you, if I had a student that was, kind of waffling about whether their college was right for them and all that kind of stuff, and they said, well, I'm going to take a gap year. I'm going to go work at, not to pick on any particular company, or Starbucks or Kmart. Yeah. And I'm going to live at home and, just see what happens. As a parent, I might say, hey, why don't we do a more formal gap year? Why don't you consider traveling to Europe and doing, 2 months of, working on that youth camp or whatever whatever right. the opportunities are. Let's find something where you're doing more than just, falling into a job that you don't like because you don't really want to go to college.
Right. Or, do something like working, but say for AmeriCorps or City Year where you get your housing and food, you get some money to cover your costs and you're away from home. I mean, there are real benefits to all of it. When students just work a regular job for a period of time, sometimes that can be a great wake-up call. It's like, wow, okay, this is the type of work I may be doing if I don't have access to more education. Maybe I do need this degree to get at this other work that I want to do. So there's a reality check for them. It can be just an appreciation for what they have in terms of what their parents are offering them in their schooling. It can be just a chance to decompress and, have more downtime at home. One of the benefits I do see, though, with a gap year is that it's a chance for students to step away from what's defined them up till now. So your friends, your family, your culture even. There is a real learning process and steep learning curve when you step away from the familiar and you're away from home. We all tend to regress when we're home. You can be 60 years old and go home to your parents and suddenly you're back being 15 or 10. So,
Right.
as soon as students walk out the door, they're instantly more mature. Years ago, we worked with a young woman who went off to London to do service work in a community center, and her mother was going on and on about how she doesn't clean up her room and she's irresponsible, blah blah blah. And then she went over to visit her daughter. What happened was the person running the center had to leave, and the girl stepped into running this place, and she came back and she said, I can't believe this is the same human being I put on the plane.
Yeah.
But given the opportunity, that young woman stepped into the work, and she was away, and the world starts showing up for the students, so they tend to step into it with a lot more focus. The other thing is you're very much on during a year like this because you're in a different situation. You have to apply yourself in a different way, and you can't go through it on automatic pilot the way you tend to with school sometimes.
Right. All right. Well, I think that was a lot of great information. But before I let you go, I'll ask you for 3 quick tips. So give us 3 ideas that parents can use. They can be related about the stuff we've just talked about or unrelated, but that will help them in the college and I guess gap year process.
Well, I would definitely say, talk to your high school counselors, see if they're aware of the gap year and if they can help you with the process. And if they can't, then try to get to, say, one of the gap year fairs that take place between January and February. And if the usagapyearfairs.org site lists where those fairs are, so if you can take your child to one of those, it really gives you at least a feel for, say, 20, 30 different programs. You can talk with program providers and get a feel for who's running these different types of programs and what's out there. Oh, I don't know if this is a tip, but I would just say, and I may have said this before, but this is such a great time in one's life to do this kind of exploring. Most parents, when they come into my office and hear what's possible, invariably somewhere in that conversation they're saying, oh, I wish I could have done this, or I wish I could do this now. But they can't because they're tied down to all these different responsibilities that they have. And for students, it's like a jewel of a period of time in their lives to go and explore in a really dynamic way and own that process. I mean, that's the biggest plug I would put in for taking this kind of time. And as I said before, it could be some of the most important time you take in terms of pivoting you toward a life that you're really going to love. Okay?
All right. Great. I guess that's all for now, as I appreciate all the great information. If people want to get a hold of you or contact your company, what's the best way for them to do that?
Well, we have a website that has a lot of information on it, and it's interimprograms.com. And we also always do a free 90-minute brainstorming session, by phone or Skype or in person. And there's no obligation. So people actually will get a lot of this information one-on-one and a potential scenario for a gap year at the end of that conversation. So very helpful.
Great. And you work with people all over the country?
All over the U.S. and, all different kinds of students, anyone who's interested.
All right.
And actually all ages. So for you parents out there, you can also consider it.
Well, I'll look into that then. So, all right, great. I appreciate all the great information, and people that want more can contact you, and we'll take it from there.
That's
I
great.
appreciate
Thank
your
you.
time.
You're welcome.
Have a question? Brad is accepting questions from his listeners now. Record a question at tamingthehighcostofcollege.com and get it answered on one of the future episodes.
For today's question, I actually have 2 questions that came relatively close together. John sent me an email that said essentially his student couldn't decide between music and graphic design as far as a major. And because of that, it was slowing down the college process because they couldn't decide on a major and therefore couldn't search for the colleges. And I had another family that I'm helping to coach right now where the student is completely undecided. They don't really have any particular direction that they think would be appropriate for them, and they're still bouncing around and changing their mind and going from career to career, and essentially are probably going to go off to college undecided and try and explore while they're at college. So what can you do about the undecided situation where you can't decide among a short list, or maybe you can't decide at all? I guess first of all, there's lots of resources out there. So you can look online. There's online websites that help students figure out career paths. Two that I found, one's called careerlocker.com, and the other one is yourfreecareertest.com. Yourfreecareertest.com is a very quick assessment. It takes 5 or 10 minutes, gives you a little bit of quick output. Is not real detailed, but it's quick and easy and just something you might want to play around with. Career Locker, which was formerly Whisk Careers, is much more in-depth, and their target is to provide career counseling information into the high schools and make it available for school counselors. But they also have a individual membership now where anybody can sign up. I think it was $19.95 for the year, and you can use their resources to help figure out what type of career or major you're looking for. In addition to that, you could work with your high school. Most high schools have some form of counselor, and some of those counselors are trained in helping students figure out career paths. And they also might have additional resources in the counselor's office, things like books and other resources. They may have subscriptions to Career Locker available so you don't have to pay for it, or other competing websites where they help students figure out what kind of careers they're interested in. You can also check out your local community college. A lot of times the local community college may have a class that helps people figure out what careers they might be suited for. And again, sometimes it's a long, in-depth class, but often it might just meet 2 or 3 times and be relatively short class and cost, $25, $50, not real expensive. And again, local community colleges also have a lot of career counselors available, and you may be able to take advantage of their help as well. I've had undecided students pursue some of the possibilities as well. Another idea would be some things like summer camps and internships, where your student pursues the possibilities on a short time frame. So maybe they become an intern at a nursing home or something and try out being a nursing assistant. Or they sign up for a summer camp where they do writing workshops and that kind of stuff if they weren't interested in journalism, let's say. Then we have job shadowing. Students can shadow somebody that's in the careers that they're considering to learn more about what those careers actually do. So again, sometimes parents can work their network, and if you can find a lawyer, if that's the direction your student is considering, and they can go to that lawyer's office and see what they do for a few hours, or have lunch with the lawyer to learn a little bit more about how the profession works and what's involved. And then the last idea is you can hire a professional. There's a lot of college counselors out there that help students figure out careers and majors as part of their services. And then oftentimes they'll also help find colleges that provide a good education for the majors that ultimately the student lands on. So you can hire a professional. And then lastly, of course, you can just accept undecided. There's a whole lot of people that went off to college undecided, and they turned out okay. So in some situations, undecided will just work itself out in the long run. The challenge, of course, is some parents are a little bit more nervous about how many semesters of college it's going to take before you land on the career that you're interested in and then get to work and actually earn a degree. So that's, I think, probably the biggest challenge with undecided is if you have a focus, you can get through college relatively quickly. If you change majors 3 times trying to figure out what you want to be when you grow up, that can be a bit more expensive because it may take you 5 or 6 years to graduate because you've spent extra time taking classes and learning that they're not right for you. All right, well, that wraps things up. I appreciate you listening. If you have any questions, feel free to email us or go to our website at tamingthehighcostofcollege.com and click on the orange button on the right side, and you can record a question and we'll play it on air and give you the answer. Again, if you appreciate the show, I would appreciate it if you went to iTunes and left us a rating and review. That helps us get found in the search engine at iTunes. That's all we have for today. We'll talk to you next week. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Taming the High Cost of College podcast. Now it's time for you to take action. Head to tamingthehighcostofcollege.com for show notes, bonus content, and to leave feedback for Brad. The next step on your college journey starts now.
Brad Baldridge is a registered representative of Cambridge Investment Research. and an investment advisor representative of Cambridge Investment Research Advisors, a registered investment advisor. Securities are offered through Cambridge Investment Research Incorporated, a broker-dealer and member of FINRA and SIPC. Brad owns two companies, Baldridge Wealth Management and Baldridge College Solutions. The Baldridge companies are not affiliated with Cambridge Investment Research.